After these horrific images that came out of Bucha and these other places, one thing we should note is that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was on Capitol Hill today warning that despite these sanctions, despite the punishment being put in place for Putin's invasion, they think it could go on for a lot longer.
CNN's Caitlin Collins. Moscow has consistently denied any responsibility for civilian deaths. When it comes to the war and their soldiers' behaviour, Russians are being fed a very different story. What we're told is an open and shut case of brutality against unarmed civilians. Russia's strictly controlled state media sees as fake news. Natalia Shaban is a professor of political communications at the University of Canterbury and a Ukrainian citizen. She spoke to Morning Report earlier about support in Russia for President Putin and his actions.
The very latest poll conducted by actually independent social research group Levada, who has been announced to be an international agent by the Russian government, their research demonstrated that around 83% of the respondents, and it was a representative sample across the whole country, approve of actions of Putin as president or as prime minister. And the question was, do you approve the actions of Putin as the president or prime minister rather than in Ukraine? And it was a rise from 69% in the previous poll in January. Disclaimer, many social research scientists are very careful about any polls conducted during the wartime. If somebody calls you in Russia at night on your landline asking, what do you think about Putin, you have to be very careful when you are replying.
And with more from Moscow, here's the BBC's Steve Rosenberg.
Apparent atrocities committed by Russian soldiers in Ukraine have sparked international condemnation. The Kremlin cannot ignore that. So the state media here does report the allegations, but it paints a very different picture. Today, Russian TV's main talk show broadcast graphic video of bodies scattered along a road in Bucha. But the word fake in large red letters was plastered across the screen. Meanwhile, studio guests spoke repeatedly about Ukrainian Nazis, Western information wars, and claimed that alleged war crimes had been staged to make Russia look bad. This is the message state TV broadcasts from morning till night, that Russia's the good guy and Ukraine and the West the villains. And because virtually all independent news sources in Russia have been shut down, the voice of the Kremlin dominates Russia's information space. The authorities also use their total control of the media to encourage Russians to blame the West, not the Kremlin, for a fall in living standards. International sanctions have already caused some economic pain here. That's expected to grow more acute over the next couple of months.
The BBC's Steve Rosenberg. Chinese authorities have extended their lockdown of Shanghai indefinitely. Initially, there had been separate measures for the eastern and western sides, but now all 25 million people are subject to restrictions. Despite the authorities' best control, social media in China is full of anger about food, deliveries not working, isolation facilities, and children being separated from parents. Here's Shi Chen, an associate professor of public health at Yale University.
It has been 2+ years for China to implement this very stringent zero-COVID policy, but things changing very fast, especially after Omicron. Shanghai was trying some kind of new thoughts to live with this virus. But after its quick spreading over the last few weeks, the central government realized this may not be a good signal because Shanghai has a big spillover effect to many other places in China. So they started to impose this very stringent policy again to Shanghai. So that was catching most of the people in Shanghai out of surprise.
That was Shi Chen, an associate professor of public health at Yale University. Police in Germany say they've shut down and seized servers of what's thought to be the world's largest illegal online marketplace. The website, Hydra, is a Russian language platform that's been operating for at least 7 years and is an online black market for illegal drugs, stolen data and forged documents. The BBC's Danny Aberhard has more.
they seized a number of servers in Germany. It follows a months-long investigation between German police and the US authorities, but there haven't been any arrests. So what investigators will now do, they'll try to access the servers and get past the security and the encryption on those servers to try to identify who was behind it and who they can actually target. The US Treasury has released a press release going further. They say it's actually based in Russia, and they've actually mentioned the tower that it's in Moscow that they say it's based in. It's a huge marketplace. We're talking about revenues of $1.3 billion in 2020, and analysts say that could account for 3/4 of all the dark web revenues in that year. Germany traditionally has strong privacy laws. For a long time, service providers couldn't be prosecuted for hosting illegal services unless it could be proved that they were aware of the illegal activity and supported it. They have changed those laws now. Law enforcement says the golden age of the dark web is over, but clearly cyber criminals are willing to take the risk, thinking that the rewards outweigh the risks.
The BBC's Danny Aberhard reporting. Another 42 genes connected to the development of Alzheimer's disease have been uncovered in a landmark study at Cardiff University. A number of the newly discovered genes focus on very detailed reactions between proteins in the body that govern how inflammation in the immune system might damage brain cells. The new risk variants are significantly associated with progression. This will provide scientists with potential new targets for treatments, medications, and lifestyle changes that could reduce the risk of the deadly brain disease. And just to hand, the New Zealand government has announced it will apply 35% tariffs to all imports from Russia and extend the existing export prohibitions to industrial products closely connected to strategic Russian industries. That comes into effect on April the 25th. Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta says images and reports emerging of atrocities committed against civilians in Bucha and other regions of Ukraine is abhorrent and reprehensible, and New Zealand continues to respond to Putin's mindless acts of aggression. This is New Zealand's most significant economic response to the Russian invasion to date. And finally, the UK has cancelled its first ever LGBT plus conference after more than 100 organisations boycotted it. Safe to Be Me was supposed to take place in June. The event will not go ahead after LGBT plus charities and other groups pulled out over the government's stance on conversion therapy. Therapy aimed at transgender people was excluded from a ban outlined last week. And that's World Watch for today. Back to you, Mani.
Kia ora, Pelina and koina te purongo o te paututanga mo tēnei rā. That is us midday report for today. Stay tuned for the latest Covid-19 update. Dr. Bloomfield, who's just announced he'll step down in a couple of months, will be there. But for now, hei kona, hei apopo.
RNZ News at 1. Good afternoon, I'm Marama Tipole. The COVID response Minister Chris Hipkins and the Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield are about to speak at a media conference at Parliament. We'll cross to that when it begins. From tomorrow, young people aged 16 and 17 can get a free booster dose of the Pfizer vaccine at least 6 months after completing their primary course.
Right. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the first episode of the final season of the Ash and Chippy Show. Today I am, of course, joined by Dr. Bloomfield, who's going to give us an update on how the health system is preparing for winter. But first, a quick update on some numbers. Today there are 12,575 new community cases of COVID-19. We're seeing the rolling 7-day average of cases continue to decline. We're down to a rolling 7-day average of 12,307 today, which is down from 14,969 last Wednesday. There are 654 people in hospital, 23 of whom are in ICU, which is down from yesterday, which was our high point. Sadly, today the Ministry of Health is reporting a further 15 deaths from COVID, or people with COVID-19, and everyone's sympathies, I'm sure, will be with the families who have suffered those losses. Today I'm able to confirm that from tomorrow, young people aged between 16 and 17, or age 16 and 17, can receive a free booster dose of the Pfizer vaccine at least 6 months after completing their primary course, i.e. having doses 1 and 2. There's around 36,000 young people aged 16 and 17 who will be able to get their booster from a walk-in vaccination clinic around the country. A booster dose is particularly recommended for 16 and 17-year-olds who are at higher risk of severe Covid-19 symptoms or hospitalisation. So that includes people who are immunocompromised or who are living with a family member who's immunocompromised, and our Māori and Pacific communities in particular. The decision on booster doses for young people protects more New Zealanders from the risk of serious complications from Covid-19. This is also a good timely reminder for those New Zealanders who haven't received their booster yet, and we encourage them to do that as soon as they are able to. So I want to recognise the work that the team at MedSafe have been doing to assess these applications. They do follow a very robust approval process to ensure that the vaccines we use here in New Zealand meet acceptable standards for safety, quality and effectiveness. And so those who are being encouraged to receive vaccines can be reassured that the approval process has been a very robust one. I'll now hand over to Dr. Bloomfield, as I've indicated, and then I've got a few other things to say at the end.
Thank you, Minister. Kia ora koutou katoa. So the health and disability sector is gearing up to prepare for the winter ahead. We know there's likely to be a baseline level of COVID-19 cases as well as other infectious diseases that we haven't really seen for the last couple of years because the border's been shut, in particular influenza, RSV and the prospect of other diseases like measles making their way across the border. I did want to take the opportunity today to emphasise what everyone can do to help protect whānau, themselves, communities and of course our health and disability system as winter approaches. So the Minister's just outlined the ongoing importance of COVID-19 vaccination and that includes in particular for Omicron getting a booster. We know that unvaccinated people or people that haven't had a third booster dose make up a disproportionate number of people who are in our hospitals. We also know that people can get COVID-19 more than once, and the evidence does suggest that vaccination provides better protection than prior infection. So if you haven't had that, even if you've had COVID-19, please do get that third or booster shot if you haven't had it already, 3 months after your infection. COVID-19 has also taught or reminded us a lot about the importance of basic public health measures that will stand us in great stead as we head into winter. We know, and even young children now know, that simple actions make a difference. Coughing or sneezing into your elbow, washing hands frequently, staying home when sick, and of course, wearing a mask when out and about to protect both ourselves and others. These measures are all important not just for COVID-19 but for other respiratory illnesses. For any virus, we know that the more people who are vaccinated, the greater our population immunity is. And this goes for COVID-19 and influenza. Rightly, our health and disability colleagues are concerned about the impact of flu this year at the same time as a possible second wave of Omicron, especially because we haven't had the flu virus circulating really in New Zealand for the last 2 years. This year, Pharmac has purchased over 2 million doses of the flu vaccine, more than any other year. So please take the opportunity to get one. Flu vaccination is free if you're pregnant, over 65, or at risk of becoming seriously ill because of underlying conditions such as diabetes, asthma or heart conditions. And this year, flu vaccination is also free for Māori and Pacifica aged 55 and over. All these are groups that are high risk of becoming very unwell if they get the flu. Many workplaces also offer free vaccination for staff. If you work for one of those organisations, please do take the opportunity. And anyone is able to get a vaccination at a small cost from general practice, community pharmacy or urgent care clinic if they don't qualify for a free vaccination. If you haven't had a flu vaccination ever before, this is the year to do it. Another action that will be very important, especially for children, is making sure that our tamariki vaccinations are up to date. And in particular, I want to give MMR a plug. We had a measles outbreak here in 2019, and we ended up with quite a number of children very sick in hospital from that. The MMR vaccine is very effective and very safe. Now, our MMR vaccination rates are lower than they should be and need to be, particularly for Māori and Pacific children. But what I would say is that our vaccination rates for other vaccines that children get at age 6 weeks, 5 months and 8 months are all high, over 90% in all ethnic groups. We just see this drop off at the 12 and 15-month MMR vaccinations, and that's where we really need to focus our efforts. Our health system will be doing that over coming weeks and months, and my request to parents and whānau is to get your kids protected from measles by getting them vaccinated twice with the MMR vaccine. We also have our catch-up campaign for 17 to 32-year-olds. It's been kick-started again, so if you're in that age group and you're not sure if you've had 2 doses of MMR, go and get one. It's free. So please do make sure you and your whānau go into winter with as much protection as you can. That way we will all be doing our bit to make sure the health system is here to care for everyone when they need care. Back to you, Minister.
Thank you. We've done a fair few of these over the last 2 years. This may well be one of the harder ones, and I did want to take a moment to say a very personal thank you to the man that most New Zealanders have come to know as the DG. As the Director General of Health, Dr. Bloomfield has advised the government at every step of our public health response to Covid-19. His workload has been enormous, but it hasn't just been related to Covid-19, and in fact, his entire life has been dedicated to the health and well-being of New Zealanders. But Covid-19 has been an enormous challenge that we have faced as a country, and Dr. Bloomfield's advice to the government has consistently informed and has been the basis for our decision-making. Dr. Bloomfield, during your time as Director General of Health, you have saved thousands, if not tens of thousands, of lives. It is important for us all to remember that the public service as a whole, and in particular the health system, has been instrumental in our response to Covid-19 and that it has been bigger than any individual. But it was Dr. Bloomfield who has had the job of calling me at all hours of the day and night. As I was preparing these notes, I was reminded of election night, where I had sat down about an hour before polls closed to eat my fish and chips, as I do on election night. And I think we were about 15 minutes away from polls closing when you rang me to tell me that there was a case of Covid-19 in the New Zealand community. So thanks for ruining that for me. But I absolutely respect your decision to take a break. It's been an incredible couple of years. You have an opportunity to go out and spread your wings. And I know that New Zealanders will join me in saying that you thoroughly deserve that. Finally, should you decide to spend some of your new spare time and take up the pursuit of cards, please do let me know, because I have to say you've got a rubbish poker face. And with that, we'll open up for questions.
Dr. Bloomfield, why are you leaving early? And when you reflect back on the last 2 years, how are you feeling about stepping down from this role?
Well, my contract is a 5-year contract, but I dare say that the 3 previous Directors General of Health have done between 3 and 4 years. I'm coming up to 4 years in June. It's a complex and challenging role at any time. And the last 2 years I don't think could have been more complex and challenging. And I've been thinking for a while about what's the right time for me to step down. It seems we're at a good point in terms of the pandemic. The response is shifting. I'm also confident that the system is in good hands with the changes that are afoot. And most certainly my family will be very pleased to have a little more of my time. I just felt it was the right time. And of course it is with very mixed feelings. Because I work with amazing people, and the hardest thing for me today is going to be talking to my staff on an all-staff Zoom meeting in about an hour's time, because they're all fantastic people, and I feel very sad. In 4 months' time, and 4 months is a long time in a global pandemic, as we've found out before, but in 4 months' time I will be leaving them in someone else's care.
Why is it mixed feelings for you? I mean, you'll probably be in Directors General past. You've gone to the next level in terms of your recognition and people feel like they know you. So is that a relief to leave that behind, or how are you feeling about all of that?
Well, I haven't thought too much about that, but what I would say is throughout the last 2 years, I've had from New Zealanders all across the country a huge number of messages of gratitude and support, not for me in my role, but for the work that our team has done. And so that's in many respects through those very tough times, and as I sat down and steeled myself to ring the Minister at all hours of the day and night, one of the things that's carried me through, and I know it's carried my staff through, is just knowing how grateful New Zealanders were and that they saw the hard work that was happening. So yes, I still find it a surprise walking down the street and people recognise me, but perhaps that will change once I'm not so much up in places like this.
What are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? I'm very proud of the way that the health system and that the public service has worked so well together to protect New Zealanders. Just remembering this is a 1 in 100 year pandemic. Every country was in the same boat here. And I think that our public service absolutely showed its quality right through in protecting New Zealanders and as part of that, not just protecting the health of New Zealanders, but protecting our economy and our social well-being as well as we might have expected we could.
Do you have a favourite, this is kind of a weird question in the middle of a pandemic, but do you have a favourite moment from the last couple of years?
Well, there are some moments that are more memorable than others. Maybe hitting such high vaccination rates and the incredible position that's put our country in particular in protecting our more vulnerable population groups and our older people, our disabled people, our poorer communities has just been such a highlight. And the work of our vaccination team has just been outstanding.
I'm guessing that the other thing you were laughing about was a famous quote from your colleague there. Minister Hipkins, you two obviously would have talked to each other basically every day for the past couple of years. Are you sad?
Absolutely. I'm sad, and I'm also very happy for Ashley, if I could call him that publicly once, because I think he thoroughly deserves a break. And I absolutely acknowledge that for those who have been at the senior levels of the pandemic response, the personal sacrifice involved in that has been enormous, and few would be able to say that they had made a greater sacrifice than Dr. Bloomfield has. And so I think that he thoroughly deserves a break, and I'm sure his family deserve to have him back for a bit as well.
Have you given any thought to what's next, Dr. Bloomfield?
Well, what's next is an extended break, so some time out to sort of just really let go of something that is I mean, the pandemic is something you carry with you 24/7, even when you're on holiday. So that's the first thing. And I'm putting some thought into what I do next. I guess I could say I'm a public servant through and through, so that will be steering what my next steps are.
Any thoughts about running for Parliament?
Not a jot.
What about an international post? What about a more international posting in public service?
Oh, well, I'll think about what the options might be when I get a bit more time. I've still got 4 months of this role to do, so that's where I'm really focused now.
One of the disappointments for you, Dr. Bloomfield, will one of the disappointments for you be the slow uptake of vaccination by Māori and the slow vaccination rate by our tamariki?
So you've heard me say this before, and I will just reiterate the point. I'm absolutely thrilled that we've got to the levels of vaccination right across the population that we've achieved, including for Māori. And again, if you go back to the very first part of our vaccination program, our vaccination rates amongst Māori and Pacifica adults 65 and over were highest. They were higher early on in the program. And we're seeing this again with the booster rates. Our booster rates for over 65s are around 90% for both Māori and non-Māori. And that is an achievement that very few population health programs have have made in years past, and this has been my one of the areas I've been incredibly interested in right through my career. So I'm proud of that, and I'm also proud of what we've learned about what you need to do. And you did point out rightly that the uptake was slower, especially amongst younger Māori, in our vaccination program, but we kept going at it, and those providers kept going, and they just put every effort in. So I'm proud of what we've learned and what we've achieved.
Previously talked about the first few weeks of the pandemic and how that was a very anxious time for you. Obviously now we're more than 2 years in. Can you describe the toll that this job and leading the health response for COVID-19 has had on you?
Well, it's stressful and the pressure's there, and of course that's one of the things that's played into my decision to stand down in July. But just to reiterate, being the Director of General of Health is actually a pretty big task at any time. The pandemic's created, of course, an extra challenge there, but it's not. I haven't been doing it alone, and so I have been working alongside amazing colleagues in the public service and an incredibly loyal and committed and professional team in the Ministry of Health and the wider health system. So I haven't, for all that the burden has been there, I've felt supported and uplifted by many, many colleagues.
And in terms of your successor, do you think it'll be a tricky navigation for them to take over the role, considering the major health reforms come into effect from July 1st? Obviously, we're not out of the pandemic yet. How challenging is that going to be for them?
Well, it's a challenge, but also an opportunity, and I think that the timing again for me at the end of July, it does mean, and I'm very focused on ensuring the Ministry of Health is well set up to do its new role in the system from 1 July. But it's an exciting opportunity for someone coming in to then really create the vision and drive that new role within the Ministry of Health. And I know there are many capable people in the New Zealand health system who could do that.
Who do you think should take the job?
Who do I think should take the job? The best person for it.
Katie's question about the toll it's taken. Did you like becoming a celebrity? Because there were the tea towels and the songs, but more recently that's come with a bit of a harder edge with some pretty nasty elements out there for leaders of the pandemic.
Well, one of the things I've just tried to be right through the pandemic, of course, and it's the only thing you can be, is just be myself. And yes, sometimes that's, created different responses. I don't pay too much attention to the negative commentary, and I'm thankful and don't expect the positive feedback. One observation I would make, because I do get, and I know the Minister gets, some quite unpleasant online and other sort of feedback, is it's very gendered. And I just want to put that out here and say that the nature of the feedback I get is nothing compared with what a number of my colleagues who happen to be female get. And I think that's terrible. Any of that sort of behaviour is terrible in my mind, but the fact that it's so gendered is something we absolutely need to do something about.
Does it also come from men more often?
Well, I don't look at it too hard to really determine that, please.
Dr. Bloomfield, I understand you have faced many challenges over the past 2 years, but how tough has it been dealing with the demands of iwi Māori?
It's been a huge pleasure working with iwi Māori over these last, 4 years, nearly 4 years in the role, but especially these last 2 years. And I've made the point that at the very start of the pandemic, the very first communities to mobilise were iwi Māori, to protect their whakapapa, their kaumata and kuia, because they still had that vivid memory of the pandemic 100 years before. And I think they set the scene. They showed us the way, and it was after that other communities then mobilised. And in that very first lockdown, when actually we all had to look after each other, it was iwi Māori who led the way, and I think they've continued to do so through the pandemic. And again, much of the success in our vaccination program is because of iwi Māori, our Māori provider sector, our Māori communities that got out and did the hard mahi to get people in there and get them vaccinated.
And how do you think the relationship with the ministry and iwi Māori will go moving forward?
Oh, I'm really confident in that. I've got an excellent Deputy Director General of Māori Health. He's been a huge support for me. I think he's provides great leadership, And I'm confident that not just the relationship between the Ministry of Health, but our new organisations, Health New Zealand and of course the Māori Health Authority, will continue to develop and thrive as the system moves into its new sort of structure.
Minister, can we ask about the boosters? We were expecting an announcement on this earlier in the year. Why has it taken so long to announce these boosters, and is it a bit late considering how far through the Omicron outbreak we are?
Boosters for the 16 and 17-year-olds have been available on prescription for some time now. So people who have had a desperate need to get them have been able to get them. But in weighing up all of the different factors and all of the different advice that we receive around vaccination, we made the decision not to go further with that until MedSafe had approved booster doses for that age cohort. And so that process takes time. They have a very high evidential threshold that they need to satisfy themselves of. That has now been met.
But why wasn't that approval given enough space to happen before the outbreak, this next wave of the outbreak?
Well, ultimately, MedSafe needed to gather the evidence. Of course, the evidence takes some time to put together, and so that's ultimately been the big driver behind the time frame.
Did it take so long?
No, because ultimately, we've said all along that we want the process around approvals to be robust. And when we make these decisions, I want to be able to, hand on heart, say, look, this has been through a really robust approval process. It's safe, and all the evidence stacks up. And by using the MedSafe process, I think that gives us the confidence to be able to do that.
Sorry, just another on boosters while we're on it, thank you. Can you please explain sort of why it is just the 16 to 17-year-old age group? And what would you say to concerns that just vaccinating sort of this new age group would remove focus from boosting the more vulnerable?
Yeah, I'll just make a brief comment and then I'll get Dr. Bloomfield to comment on the specific age cohort, particularly for the younger teenagers. I am concerned that our booster rates overall have plateaued at around that sort of 73-74% marker. Having said that, I do think that one of the likely contributors to that amongst some of the populations where booster rates have been lower has been the rate of infection in those communities, and that there's a 3-month stand down after someone's had Covid-19 before they can get a booster. And so we are seeing evidence that in some of those communities where the booster rates are lower, actually people are now waiting out their time before they can get their boosters. So yes, of course I'd like to see the booster rates go higher. We're in an internationally comparable position. Booster rates across the world are lower than they were for the first and second doses, but of course, we shouldn't let up. We still want to keep pushing and see if we can get rates higher. But on the age issue, I'll hand over to.
Yes, so two assessments really of vaccinating under 18-year-olds with a booster shot. One was that MedSafe assessment, and they had to wait until Pfizer put the application in before they could assess it. And the value of us waiting until MedSafe has done that is then now all vaccinators are able to vaccinate that age group rather than just people who are prescribers, which adds a burden, it would add an extra burden on the system. So I think the timing is fine there. The advice from our technical advisory group was also very clear that they felt 16 and 17-year-olds, the evidence supported, but not routinely offering it to 12 to 15-year-olds. However, if there is 12 to 15-year-olds are immunocompromised or they're at high risk, then their practitioner would certainly be able to offer them a booster if they felt that was worthwhile doing.
Actually, helped normalise Te Reo Māori during the 1 p.m. press conferences over the past 2 years. How do you react to being noted as a Te Reo Māori champion?
Oh, well, I'd be thrilled if I was. I just feel it's been something I've had the opportunity to do, and I dare say in the 2 years I've only had 2 negative pieces of feedback on that, and I was more than happy to say that I saw it as my role to help use and normalise the use of what is a taonga for our whole country, not just for Māori.
And how confident are you that your replacement will be bringing the same energy to kaupapa Māori, the same energy that you brought to the role?
Well, I'm confident because I think that if I look across my public sector chief executive colleagues, this is really a standard we set for ourselves now. So whilst I might be the one up here at the at the podium, I'm by no means the most competent user of Te Reo amongst my counterparts, and I would say that all of them, to a person, are doing their best to continue to advance the use of Te Reo in their organisations and also in their public communications.
Dr. Bloomfield, you said that COVID is going to be around in New Zealand and indeed the world for a long time to come. We've got a Minister for COVID and we've got a Minister of Health. Going forward, would it be your advice to the government to have a separate agency that deals specifically with COVID-19, separate to the Ministry of Health but works closely alongside them?
Actually, that's one for the Minister. I don't have a particular view on that, and I'm not sure he would ask my advice on that. But the only thing I would say is, if COVID is going to be with us long term as an endemic illness eventually, then it will take its place alongside other health priorities and health issues, and we would want to and expect to normalise the health system response to it. I can certainly talk for the health system response to it, rather than treating it as something special, because what we of course want to do is make sure we are giving it the priority that it deserves alongside many other health sector priorities.
Just a brief comment. I'm aware that there's been some speculation on this topic, and I'm sorry to tell you, you're stuck with me for a wee while longer yet. There is still a bit more to go on this pandemic, and there are still some strategic decisions that government needs to take. Obviously, we've got decisions around the traffic light framework coming up. We've got planning underway now around both resurgence and new variants that we have to continue through. We've got decisions around future waves of vaccination to work our way through. So there's still more for us to do, and I'm committed to seeing those things through. That said, I think Dr. Bloomfield's absolutely right. We will reach a point at some stage where the COVID response folds back into a more business as usual type approach. We're not there yet, though.
Dr. Bloomfield, were you ever asked, or did you ever express an interest in having a role in the new health system after reforms?
Well, I do have a role, and the new structures come into being once the Pai Ora Bill is passed, and they come into being from 1 July formally. So the Ministry of Health continues to have a role in the new system, and I'll be the Director General for the first month of that time, and so the Director General role does continue, and I was very happy to continue in that role for as long as I felt it was the right time to be there.
Did you want to have a role beyond that? Or were you asked to have a role beyond that?
Well, actually, I was quite happy with the role I've had, and felt that was, if I look at my career, that's where it had led me to, and I felt that was the place I could and was adding the most value to the system, and I will continue to do that up until the 29th of July.
Coming in actually prompt that decision, because it meant that someone new with fresh eyes could come in and take over that new system, I guess, without you having to sort of make that switch?
Well, I'm already making the switch because we've got 2 interim agencies. I'm working closely with the chief executives of those 2 agencies already. But what I would say is that, of course, the timing of that new system and what will be a new role for the ministry in the system, in the sense of a much stronger focus on policy and strategy on monitoring, that's a good time really for someone new to come in and then be able to enhance and focus those functions of the ministry for its future role, and that's very different from the role I took on 4 years ago. So I think that just is part of the timing around my decision.
Are you highly supportive of that reform work? Do you think the way that the new structure is being set up is right for New Zealand's health system?
Well, I've been in the health system for a long time, all my career, and I've seen different structures. And the structure can either support or not support the sort of outcomes and objectives that you're wanting to achieve. And the purpose of the reforms is to try and get greater consistency, greater equity, and a greater efficiency really out of what the system can deliver. And so the structural component, the structural changes are part of that. But more important are some of those other things that lie behind it, the objectives, the establishment of the Māori Health Authority to get that real focus on improving Māori health. I think the structures can and will support the direction and the aspirations that the government has for the health system.
Just a couple more questions.
Dr. Bloomfield, the pandemic response as a whole has been lauded worldwide, but there were some pretty rocky moments along the way. Do you have any regrets?
Well, let me just separate out regrets from did I every day think about things that we could or should be doing better. Absolutely the latter. And in fact, that's been a feature of our response right through, not just the health response, but the wider government response. And I think, Minister, we've still got over something around 12 or 1,300 recommendations from the various reviews that have been done. And many of those pointed out things that we could or should be doing better, and we take that seriously. In terms of regrets, not specifically, except perhaps that I didn't write down what was happening at the time. I must say I was probably too busy. But I think I've always remained focused on what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and really just looking at that big picture. And I think in terms of those outcomes, that we've achieved what we would have hoped we would do at the outset.
And like writing a book, is that what you mean when you say
just keeping a diary, because there's such an intense and in a sense, unforgettable experience as some of the moments, some of the decisions that were taken, some of the interactions that lay around those decisions. I didn't take notes at the time, but maybe my memory will serve me well at some point.
Was there a moment that, you say, talk about the weight that was on your shoulders. Is there a moment that stands out for you?
Oh, well, it's a huge decision for the government to lock the country down, and that was incredibly early on in the pandemic, and it was nowhere in our plans or even in our ideas that we might have done that. And so to give advice that was the basis for that decision was a huge thing, but there were many big and momentous decisions right through the response that. This is what created the intensity, really, was that it was every day, every decision, really, and every bit of advice. There was a lot at stake. And so that, I guess it's that combined weight of all those things that really created the challenge and the intensity.
You said that Māori have led the charge in this pandemic, and you've given a lot of mihi to Māori from the podium there. Do you think that the government has done enough to support the efforts of Māori at those front lines?
Yes, I do. And in fact, one of the things I really, I think has been great, has been, as someone who's been around the system for a while, is the investment in our Māori provider sector over the last 2 years has been substantial, and the biggest investment in 20 years, and probably bigger than the original investment that set up those whole Māori providers. So, yes, I do think there's been and I know from having been part of the discussions, a substantial focus on and investment in our Māori provider sector.
The Minister mentioned on Monday that there's a variant response plan in the works. Can you talk a little bit more about that and when we might be able to see it?
Yeah, Dr. Verrills, from a ministerial perspective, is overseeing that particular work with a lot of support from the Ministry of Health, obviously, who are doing a lot of the legwork there. We have to be prepared for the fact that new variants are going to emerge. We don't necessarily understand what the nature of those might be or what the consequences of those might be. As we saw right the way through the pandemic, the virus keeps changing the rules on us, and so one of the things that we have to do is do as best as we can forecast what our future needs might be and what the future scenarios might be, and then be willing to adapt, depending on what we're confronted with. So that's very much what the variant planning is focused on.
Rats and long COVID, two separate questions. There have been anecdotal reports of people regularly testing negative on rats, then testing positive with a PCR test. Is that concerning, and should it be easier for people to get a PCR test?
I'll ask Dr. Bloomfield to make a comment. I'll make one as well, which is we knew when we moved to using rapid antigen tests as our primary form of testing that it was going to mean that there would be more cases that would slip through the cracks. And so that was one of the realities of switching up our testing methods. PCR is the gold standard testing when it comes to COVID-19, but you can't do that when you're dealing for every case when you're dealing with the case volumes that we have been dealing with. I don't think any countries can really have been able to do that for the types of volumes that we've been talking about. So, testing is not the only thing that we're asking here, though. We're asking household contacts to stay home for a period of time for a reason. We're asking people to monitor for symptoms and stay home if they are unwell for a reason. We're asking people to wear masks. We're asking people to wash their hands and do the social distancing and do all of those public health measures, because there is nothing here that's 100% foolproof. And so, the testing methods are slightly less, reliable than when we were using PCR for everything, but we've got other public health measures in place to compensate for that.
The only additional comment I would make is that it shows what the limitation is of rapid antigen tests. They're not as sensitive as PCR testing, and that's why, and we faced quite some criticism for it, why we didn't roll them out earlier was because in a low prevalence situation, which New Zealand was in for the best part of 2 years, 9 out of 10 positive tests would have actually been false positives. And now we find, of course, and you'll all know people who have been clearly symptomatic, they're clearly close contacts, but have had repeated negative tests and then return a positive rapid antigen test or a positive PCR eventually. We are going to be using the PCR testing as part of our confirming cases and identifying those people who will benefit from Paxlovid, and so we will see PCR testing go up as we roll out the Paxlovid.
Just very quickly on long COVID, is the government considering any support for people who have long COVID and can no longer work full time?
We obviously keep all of that under review. There is some support available already, but the evidence there is still emerging. But look, we keep that under constant review. Jenny, you can have the last.
Really quick fire questions with Dr. Bloomfield. What's the weirdest question you've been asked?
I've been asked the weirdest thing about the questions, and this is what the public I think points out to me, is when different reporters ask the same question repeatedly and get the same answer. But anyway, that's something I've got used to.
What's the weirdest gift you've received?
The weirdest gift I've received? Well, I'm not wearing them today, but early on I did get a very nice pair of tie-dyed Thunder pants, which came as a surprise. I've had all manner of gifts. In fact, I've got a beautiful handmade cushion that arrived just a couple of weeks ago from Henderson Intermediate School children, so I wanted to do a shout out to them.
Are you going to miss the limelight?
Am I going to miss it? No, not a bit.
How long are you going to sleep for when you leave?
As long as I can. I'm not a big sleeper, as my wife will attest to, but I'll just look forward to relaxing. There's plenty of books on the pile that I need to read.
And finally, is there going to be karaoke at your leaving party, and what song are you singing?
Heck yes, and I'll start with, actually I famously did a duet with Minister Verrill to Staying Alive, but probably I'll kick off with Friday I'm in Love by The Cure.
All right, we'll wrap up there. Of course, Dr. Bloomfield is still here for a few months yet, so thanks everybody.